Welcome back to the Fairway Performance Podcast. My name is Sean Dykoff and I'm the host of this show. And my aim for this podcast is to help you improve your best asset on the golf course, which is, of course, your body. Now, on today's episode, what I'm going to discuss is early extension. Firstly, how it shows up in two different types of individuals or two different types of client that I work with. Someone who's developed it as a child and someone who has developed it as an adult. And then we'll talk about how we can address each of those. But first, we need to set the scene and talk about what early extension actually is. And early extension, if we think about it, is your hips extending or excessively extending towards the golf ball as you are trying to turn through the ball and make impact with the golf ball. So that hip extending towards the ball causes a few different issues, and it might show up in a couple of different ball flights if you have this. So the first is I'm talking from a right-hander's perspective here. So if you're a left-hander, you'll just obviously mirror image this. But what I see is someone who doesn't turn through the ball or they early extend, they will have three different ball flights. The first is they might just block the ball. This is because the club isn't rotating through and closed at impact, and they find the ball just comes off the club face to the right because they leave the club face open at impact. The second is somebody who is a little more coordinated. So as their handicap starts to decrease, what they might start to do is they might start to actually close the club face, but just use their hands at impact as opposed to their body rotating through. So they're starting to get timing and coordination is a little bit better. And then they can start to either hit it straight or with a little bit of a baby draw. Because they're turning the club at impact. So the club face is closing and it turns it into a bit of a right to left spin, which will draw the golf ball if you're a right-hander. Then the last one is if the timing is off for the day, you may have a bit of a duck hook or a ropey hook. So this was me in the past. So I had quite good timing. I'd played a lot of golf as a kid. As I became an adult, I had, this early extension issue happening. And I still struggle with it from time to time. But what I found was if I just tried to rotate through the ball, I hit a little bit of a draw, that was fine. But then every now and then, the shot shape that would sneak in would be the bad shot shape, the one in, 10, 20 shots that just turned out not so good, was the big ropey hook that would just end up, out of bounds or in the dam or something like this. So with that, it's because the club face turns too fast at impact. And what we find is that just turns into a bit of a hockey slap shot. And it just puts overspin on the ball, and there's just too much right to left spin. It goes very right to left for that right-hander, obviously, as the context was that I'm talking from a right-hander's perspective. Now, so that's what can happen and what early extension is, and a couple of shot shapes that I've seen happen because of early extenders. How do we address this, and how do we know which type of early extender we are? So the two different types of early extenders I find is, firstly, someone who's developed this habit or this swing characteristic as a child. Now, the reason somebody would develop this as a child is because as a young boy or a young lady, it's very hard to develop too much power to be able to hit the golf ball far without extending your hips. Because if we think about what a hip extension is it's a way to derive power through the ground and send us vertically. So when we go through the kinematic sequence, essentially we're trying to drive into the ground, through all of our limbs, and then into the club head. So that power is just coming from us extending fully, which is the early extension happening, the hips extending fully. And because my theory behind this is because we're children and we hit a lot more golf balls and we have, we're a little more athletic as children, potentially for some people than, when they're older, they're just not playing as many sports and whatnot. We can get away with this because our timing is okay and we're hitting lots of golf balls in like school holidays and, breaks and summer breaks and vacations and whatnot. We might find ourselves being able to handle it. But then as an adult, we start to do this and we just can't get the control of the golf ball because we're not playing as much as we were when we were kids. So the early extension movement pattern is really ingrained into you as a child, and then it just carries over into being an adult. So that's the first person. The second person is somebody who develops this as an adult due to poor mobility, poor hip rotation or pelvic rotation, and poor pelvic tilt. So pelvic tilt, pelvic rotation, and hip mobility. If you have these things or one of or all of these things, then it's really going to hinder your ability to rotate through the golf ball, which is then going to cause you to potentially early extend. So this is the second type of person I find. Now, this type of person might not have done it as a child. They might not have done it as they were growing up and in their 20s and 30s, but now that they're 40, 50, 60 years old, they've spent 20, 30, 40 years sitting in an office job, working, driving around for sales, whatever it might be, but just in a seated position like I am now with my hips in a flexed position, not an extended position. So extended would be standing. So my legs are at extension. At the moment, they're flexed in a seat. This is causing my hip flexors to be closed. It's causing my, glutes and everything around it to be shut off and not working because they're not active in keeping me standing upright in a posture or moving up and down stairs or sitting up and down constantly. So not having those muscles engaged and not working them too much just causes them to be not utilized very much. So that in itself will just stop our ability to rotate the hips or tilt the pelvis, posterior and anterior tilting of the pelvis, and also cause hip mobility to be poorer than somebody who moves them around a little bit more. So this is the second type of person who can develop that early extension, and it's the same thing. They need to extend their hips forwards to derive power because they can't rotate through the ball, but just a different reason behind them doing that. So with these two things in mind, what are the two different fixes, or how do I go about the approach to help somebody overcome these swing faults? So for me, I was in the first basket. What it became was developing strength through and developing the ability to be strong and the ability to develop power without having to fully extend the legs. Just creating a really good solid strength base and also power base without having to extend my hips, just having a little bit of hip extension, but still the ability to be rotating the hips through the ball without pushing them too far forwards and being excessive in that hip extension movement allowed me to stay in golf posture and be rotating through the ball. And what I find now is through a couple of different other factors as well, but instead of hitting a draw as my bad shot, I'll be coming a little bit outside to in as I impact the ball because I'm able to rotate through the ball, and I've started hitting a really good fade. So most of my really great drives now are fairly straight or a little bit of a fade, or if I early extend and have that outside to in swing path, it generally tends for me to not open or not close the club face and just hit a nice draw. I'll hit a big slice when I do it. So it's changed that for me. So overcoming that for somebody who's developed as a child, just to reiterate that, it's developing strength and the ability to produce power without having to fully extend your hips. So just a little bit of a hip extension, but having a strong, solid foundation in the legs, the glutes, the hamstrings, and just being really rock solid down the bottom there. The next person, so the person who has been seated for that 20, 30, 40 years, and they've developed this early extension or have this early extension, for this person, it's a different approach. So the approach for this person is to increase mobility through anterior and posterior tilting of the pelvis. So think of an exercise like the cat camel or targeted cat dogs or cat camels, however you want to describe that exercise. And then the other one is through pelvic rotation and hip rotation. So we want to take the hips through internal and external rotation with exercises such as the 90-90 hip switch or 90-90 reach, internal hip rotations. Squatting is a really good one. Lunging is a really good one because it's taking our hips through flexion and extension, and there's an element of stability to stop the knees from caving in, and we're driving the knees out over the toes, which is a form of external rotation. So we're developing mobility and strength through external rotation and limiting the amount that the knees internally rotate when we do that to avoid injuries and valgus knees and whatnot. So that's the second type of person. They're the things that this person would be doing, is increasing the range of motion they have through those areas. But on top of increasing the range of motion, also thinking about developing strength through that range of motion. So mobility is great, but without strength and mobility, we're really limited with how much it's going to convert to our golf game and how we're going to be able to play without actually being injured while doing that. Because obviously, if we are really strong, if we are really mobile, but we don't have strength, it opens us up to move in that fashion. But then we're just not strong there. So if we get put into that position, or we put ourselves into that position a little too fast or snappy, or rotate a bit out of control or something like this, or on a weird uneven lie, and we're not strong through that rotation or the ability to rotate in the different areas, then that's what opens us up to injury. So the demands of the sport that we're playing are exceeding the strength and mobility characteristics of our body, and that's where we start to become injured and run into injuries and problems. So hopefully that's shed some light on the two different types of people that I see struggle with early extension, and just a few different ways that you can approach overcoming this by yourself. The last thing I'll say on this is also having a good swing coach in your back pocket is going to be great to help you with this, because obviously early extension, we can improve the way the body moves, we can improve our strength and our mobility and all of this stuff. But we also just need a couple of either tactile, visual, or verbal cues from a swing coach to be getting us thinking about, not early extending as we go through the golf swing. So for me, just to share with you, one that's worked for me really well is just the old imagine that there's a seat behind you or a wall behind you, and your bum cheeks are both touching the wall when you're set up in your golf posture, ready to hit the driver. As you, a right-hander, as you rotate into your backswing, your right bum cheek will be pressing hard into that wall and your left will come off. So that's forming the rotation backwards, which we want 60 degrees of rotation backwards into that trail hip for internally rotating into the trail hip. Then as we start to rotate into our downswing at impact, we want our bum cheeks to be both touching the wall. So right and left side touching the wall as we impact the golf ball. And then our left side is pressing hard into the wall and right side is coming off the wall so that our hips and our belt buckle can be pointing towards the target. So whatever it takes for you to, because there's no one cue that is amazing for everybody, the best cue a coach can give for anybody is always going to be the easiest to understand language for that person or their own terminology. So I'll often ask clients, or when I owned a brick and mortar gym, what does this position feel like for you? Or how would you describe this movement? And I'll demonstrate it to them. And then from there, they will tell me, hey, that looks like a monkey bearing his chest, or that looks like if it was a deadlift, I had someone say it looks like a stripper putting their butt up against the pole, or some sort of thing like this that helps them remember that position, or really ingrain that position in their mind. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I say, so long as it's something that person actually can attach to and remember to get better with that movement or to get better with their golf swing, whatever it might be. So I'm just going to leave you with that today. I think I've waffled on enough about this topic. If you have any further questions, or you want to figure out whether you have early extension, or you want to talk more about how you can overcome this swing fault and actually, fully eliminate it, I have successfully done that on the most part. Every now and then it creeps back in just because I've done it for tens of thousands of reps. I've had it out of my game for a long time now, but when I'm not concentrating or it's a hot day down here in the Cayman Islands where I'm currently living, 35 degrees and 80% humidity. For you Americans, that's like in the hundreds, 105 to 110 degrees with a high humidity. I really struggle, obviously, concentrating for the full 18 holes because of dehydration, blah, blah, blah. So, it might creep back in there. But on the most part, I've managed to almost completely eliminate that swing fault from my game, and I've helped many other people do the same. So if you want to talk more about how a mobility screening and a golf fitness program can help with that, always feel free to reach out. My email is Sean, SHAUN, at fairwayperformance.com, or you can also reach me on Instagram, and I'll have my Instagram handle down in the show notes, so you can reach out after this episode. I hope that's really helped. As always, play well, train hard, and I'll speak to you guys next week.